So we'll start from the top there with the calculator. So let's jump into Unity here. So here is the project that I've linked into the chat. You can see there is a Git repo and there's instructions on how to install that Git repo. After you've done that, you'll see in the package manager, you're following the Git instructions, you'll have this package installed. This is the RMC Mini MVCS. So RMC is my consulting company, Revela Multimedia Consulting. All of the packages that I release have that name. And then the Mini MVCS concept is Model View Controller Service, and with just a very light footprint. So it handles the most basic common workflows that you'll encounter, including everything we're looking at today is built on top of this tech. And it's Mini because it's quite elegant, lightweight, etc. Then under the samples here, you're going to want to click Samples and Import. I've already done that, so we're going to go look over it. But again, the README explains how to get those samples in there. So let's start with our first one here. We're going to close a few things here just to get us ready here. Then in the project, in the assets, we have the More folder, and we're going to step through them. So we'll start from the top and look at this calculator sample. Now, all of the MVC structures, we organize the folder structure to mimic the MVCS pattern. And every once in a while, I'll just make sure that I have my video on the correct side. For example, I can bounce myself over here. Sometimes I might be covering stuff up. Just know if and when I catch myself doing it, I'll pop myself back over here. So again, here's the structure. We have a folder for model, view, and controller. And let's open up one of the parent folders here. And here we're looking at it. I'll try to be aware as I'm showing the code here of having the code be presented about 25 lines high so that you get quite a bit, but it shouldn't underlap my video here. So let's talk about this. So this is the mono behavior that sits in the scene that kicks off the entire project. If you're familiar with Unity, you know that at the very least, you'd have one game object in the scene with one mono behavior on it, and that's where you kick off your project, game, demo, etc. So here we have that. And all I do here is I have a serialized field to grab the view, which is a separate game object, just to separate the concerns. And then in the start method provided by Unity, I create the calculator mini. So anytime you see one of my classes called mini, that's meant to be this parent object. And typically in these examples, there's exactly one. So here all I do is take the view in, pass it into the mini, and initialize the mini. Now let's run the demo and see exactly what happens here. Make it nice and big for us. So here we have an A field, a B field, a result field, and then we're able to add them together and reset them. Notice that add and reset are grayed out because you haven't inputted any fields in here. So there's some very light validation done. Let's say we wanted to add 2 plus 3. Now the add button is available, and we click them and the result is 5. I can click reset. I'll choose 5 and 10 and click add again, and we see the result is 15. So we have the UI shown here, and then some sort of calculations being done on the UI, and then those results of the calculations go back to the UI. So very fundamental, classic example of doing MVC here is to divide up what, as a beginner, you might make one class that does all of this, has the views, has the UI, does the calculations, takes the user input, reflects it out there. But on a larger project, that would become unscalable. So let's see how we set up the scene here. So we've got, in each of these scenes, we have a world game object, which is just an empty game object that has a couple children in it, the camera and the lighting. So I just hide that since it's the boilerplate basic stuff in every single scene. Then we have the calculator view. Let's take a look at that. So that is using Unity UI, which is the most popular UI system that's been around for years, not to be confused with UI Toolkit, which is even newer, but this is your standard UI. And we've got the different UI elements. We have the event system. It's all pretty boilerplate stuff. And then here, I will pop myself over here. So we have the calculator view script, and that is just one custom script that I've added that takes each of those UI elements. So what I do with that is just store them there and then be able to get access to them. So that's how the view is set up. Then, as I mentioned, here's the example itself, and we're drag the view into it. So anytime in Mini MVCS that you want to have a view that extends mono behavior, which is a super common but optional pattern, then you want to have that be able to be accessed by the Mini itself. So you pass in the reference to the view into the example. So again, here we were in our example. Here's the view. Here comes the Mini. Let's take a look at how that's set up. Again, each time, getting a little wild with our zoom here. Okay, so here is the Mini pattern. It extends the built-in Mini MVCS. Here in the constructor, it takes in that view. Then in the initialize, it creates a context. Now, context is the glue that has the model, view, and controller communicating into the same system. If you had multiple contexts, you would have multiple minis. But typically in our projects, including this one, we have one mini, which means we have one context. You can think of it like the little radio channel that gets all these three different concerns to talk to each other. So we create a context there, just creating the simple context there. Then we create a custom model that's going to hold our specific values here. We create a specific controller here. Controllers are the glue, again, that get the business logic done. So I take in a model, I take in a view, and we're able to have the two of them talk to each other. And then, as is the standard pattern with this, what I do is I initialize everything explicitly. So you can see here, we create the context, we create the model, we create the controller, and then after all that, we initialize each thing. Typically, it's at the initialization phase that stuff really starts happening. If I didn't initialize them, they would sit there, perhaps connected together and ready to do things, but wouldn't really kick off their process. And as I mentioned here, often the order of initialization is important. So I have to initialize the model, the view, and the controller. And that's not an explicit rule across all projects, but you'll find that depending on which the dependencies happen, you'd want to have them start kind of in the simplest and easiest to initialize. And typically your controller is initialized last. So cool, let's take a look at each of these. Here's the calculator model. So the model in the MVC framework, it's your dumb data storage. So here I'm storing the A, B, and result that we saw in the view. Now, I use a custom class that I've created that's included in the Mini MVCS called an observable. So anytime you see observable int, just think that that's a regular old Unity int that's meant to store whole numbers, but it comes with a little bit of extra power that can dispatch events and be listened to and do a little bit of data binding. So here I'm storing 3 different ints, and then I initialize them all to 0, 0, 0. So that's it for the model. Now we're back here. Let's look at the controller. Controllers tend to be a little bit more complex. So here I am using the interface iController. I have a reference to the model, which we just looked at, and the view. I store them here. And then in the initialize, what I do is I listen that anytime the add button or reset button are clicked, I listen back to that. And let's look at what the consequences are. Well, anytime the controller here hears the view button has been reset, then what we'll do is we'll reset the values in the model. Pretty simple, straightforward. Anytime the add is done, here the controller's actually what does the calculation. So it's going to say A plus B is the result, and that's it. Now, notice here again, because I have the A, B, and result are of a type observable int, you always have to do dot value to actually set them. So you can take a look at the source of the observable int in the free Git repo that's linked in the chat. But you'll see that the powerful thing here is that anytime you set that value, an event is dispatched, which any system can listen to. So again, we're starting to talk about some light data binding there. So that's it. Now let's just talk about the view, which is the last thing that we haven't looked at. So we'll go up here to our reference of the view. All right. So the view, it extends mono behavior. So there's no rule that any of the MVCS concerns need to extend mono behavior. It's up to you. Each of them or all of them or none of them can extend mono behavior, but it's very common that the view extend mono behavior. And that's because typically the view deals with taking user input, showing and rendering graphics to the user. And in the Unity world, having a mono behavior helps that stuff happen. So here I create some Unity events for when the add and reset button are clicked. There's some setup here. I listen to the UI elements. So I'm using Unity events here to listen for when these text field changes. Anytime one of these text field, anytime the model value changes. So here I'm listening to the A, here I'm listening to the B, and here I'm listening to the result. Anytime that those change, then I just update the text values. So this is our two-way binding. If the user types into the input field, that gets listened to here and sent to the model. And if the model ever gets changed because of the add or the reset, then it passes it back to the view. So that's where we're doing our data binding. And down here, I do a little additional step to gray out the reset button and gray out the add button. If there isn't any valid input in the fields, then I just check that here. Anything else to see here? Yeah, I guess when the user clicks the add button, then I dispatch the add a custom event. So let's run the demo again. I'll make it nice and big. And oh, maybe I was covering up code for a lot of that. Whoops. We'll just try and pop myself on the right side here. So let's try 1 + 1, and then I'll hit reset. And 2 + 2, and I'll hit add. So there's the result that we have there. So that's it for the calculator demo.